Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulullah. A'udhu billahi minash shaitan rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Hilal sighting and Islamic dates, issues and solution, inshallah. A lot of work on this topic has been done by a number of brothers and sisters all over the world, including but not limited to the Hilal Sighting Committee of North America and the Islamic Crescent Observation Project. Much of the work presented here today can be found at these websites www.hilalsighting.org and www.icoproject.org. Here's an outline of how we plan to proceed today. We start with our motivation and goals, some basic information on Hilal sighting, calculations for the dark astronomical new moon versus calculations for the visible crescent Hilal, UmmUlQura calendar and the Saudi Hilal sighting process, global sighting versus local sighting versus Saudi sighting, issue of Adha date, sighting and calculations, are they complementary or conflicting, zone of uncertainty in calculations, naked eye versus telescope sighting, group versus solo sighting, number of witnesses required, size of Matla, etc. In the end, we summarize and conclude with a solution and action items, inshallah. What are our motivation and goals? Inshallah, we all, I think, should have the same goals, meaning to reach correct dates for the Islamic occasions, which are acceptable to a broad spectrum of ulama and verifiable by the ordinary masses. We would like the Muslims to be unified and have a mutual understanding of each other. And may Allah give us this and all khair. Ameen. Here's some basic facts about astronomy. The moon revolves around the earth. When it comes in between the earth and the sun, the completely dark side of the moon faces the earth and it cannot be seen. It's a completely dark astronomical new moon. When it moves further away, then a small portion of the light from the sun starts getting reflected off its surface towards the earth, and that's when we see the crescent shaped hilal. So the hilal is not the same as astronomical new moon. Hilal is typically a day or two after this completely dark astronomical new moon, which is invisible. This is also called the conjunction in astronomy. The Quran and the Hadith refer to the hilal with its characteristic crescent shape, which is likened to original qadim, old and withered lower part of a date stalk in Surah Yasin. There are no verses in the Quran or in the Hadith which refer to Qamar Jadid or new moon in respect to fasting, or to ikhtaran, which is conjunction, or to the vilada of the moon. It doesn't say sumu li viladatihi, it says sumu li royatihi. So it refers to the roya or the sighting of the hilal. This is also what makes the 13th, 14th and 15th of the month as the white fasts, the siyam abiyat. Because if we start with the astronomical new moon, then the days which are closest to the full moon would be 14, 15, 16 and not 13, 14, 15. So the point is that the new moon is not the hilal. Hilal is later, and also the new moon or the astronomical new moon corresponds to the eclipse. And despite the fact that there was at least one eclipse occurring during the time of Prophet ﷺ, there's no evidence to the fact that to indicate that he ﷺ asked to start the month with an eclipse. So that's the first message. The hilal is not the same as the astronomical new moon, but it's something which comes later. Now, where on earth would the hilal first be seen? Some people incorrectly think that the hilal will always be seen in the eastern countries before the western countries. But that's not true, because the earth is not flat. Instead, it's spherical in shape, and east and west are only relative terms. In reality, the hilal could be seen first in just about any country, usually closer to the equator around the globe. Once it is seen in one location, then as we go west, the sunset time would be later and later, thus making the hilal bigger and bigger and hence easier to be seen. Eventually, when we cross the artificial international date line, the solar conventional date changes and the hilal is seen the next day in the countries beyond the IDL. So the second message I'd like to give is that hilal would typically not be seen on one single date all around the world. The Saudi UmmUlQura calendar, from the 1950s to early 70s, actually it was a very good calendar, meaning it was very close to actual visibility. Its criteria was that if the moon is at least 9 degrees above the horizon on the 29th of the month, then the next day would be the first of the month. Then unfortunately in 1973 it was changed to a very, very bad criteria, which is very different from visibility. It started being related to conjunction before midnight in Greenwich near London. In 1998 Gregorian 1420 Hijri, it was adjusted to reflect moonset after sunset in Makkah, and in 2003 it was further modified slightly to begin to include the conjunction as a factor. But these new factors, the moonset after sunset and so on, they still do not reflect the visibility of the Hilal, and they are definitely not as good as the original model of the 1950s. And the authors know that this new criteria is not reflecting the visibility, but they say this is not for religious dates, this is only for civil dates. But the problem is that this calendar, even though it's for civil use, it sets the expectations, and hence it affects or encourages the errors. So we'd like to have this calendar reflect visibility in the ideal case, or at the very minimum go back to the earlier criteria of the 1950s UmmUlQura calendar. Saudi Hilal sighting committees, or Lajnat li Ru'yat al-Hilal, these were started in about 1419 Hijri by the ruling council of Saudi Arabia due to complaints of errors in the announced dates. At present, these committees, each of them, they include one scholar, one astronomer, one government representative, and volunteers. At the moment, there are about 6 such committees in Saudi Arabia, near Makkah, Riyadh, Qasim, Hail, Tabuk, and Asir. And they have the official results by naked eye sighting, even though the astronomers in these committees may carry a telescope. Shaykh Al-Uthaymin indicated that he was against the use of telescopes, saying that it increases the takalluf on Muslims, which Allah does not want. He wants ibadah to be simple. So this is very good news. Then why do we still have problems with the sighting in Saudi Arabia? Well, what happens in Saudi is that the Justice Department, Majlis al-Qada al-A'la, it pretty much ignores the decision of these 6 official Hilal sighting committees and accepts the witness of just about any Muslim. And often the new month is declared when none of these 6 official Hilal sighting committees see the Hilal. Many people, including scholars, are in fact not even aware of the existence of these committees. In Eid al-Fitr at 1420, I myself went with the Makkah committee. Neither we nor the other 5 committees sighted the Hilal. But the Eid was declared for the next day. When we came back to the Haram, we heard the announcement and we were shocked. In fact, this was such a blatant error that even the moonset was before sunset in Makkah for Thursday evening. And this time, scholars like Yusuf al-Qardawi, they issued a fatwa indicating that the Muslims who celebrated Eid on Friday following the Saudi announcement should make up for the one missed Ramadan fast. Also, the next month there was a solar eclipse, which also proved the mistake in Eid, according to Shaykh Al-Uthaymin's fatwa on eclipse, which implies that if there is a solar eclipse anywhere in the world after your sunset, then the next day is not the first of the month for your city. So apparently it's not a huge number of witnesses which they get in Saudi when they have these early sightings. It's just a small number of people, typically in Tabuk, Harik, and Hawt al-Sudair. Actually, the Tabuk person is no longer is more quiet now, but Harik and Hawt al-Sudair, especially Hawt al-Sudair, Shaykh al-Khudari, who I have personally met. Actually, you can just drive up to Hawt al-Sudair from Riyadh and ask anybody who's the moon man, and they'll direct you to his house. So there are these special, people, few who are reporting this extraordinary early sighting year after year. And some of them, they even claim to journalists of seeing the Hilal before Maghrib. Saudi astronomers are quite aware of the problem, and there could be something else they are seeing. There could be something even like a white hair in the eye of a person, like it has happened with the Aslaf before. So we encourage group sighting, in particular that people should go with these official Hilal sighting committees. Now, the Saudi press has been talking about these errors. There are numerous instances. For example, the Arab News article of February 11 talked about the inaccuracy of Eid al-Fitr 1420. Dawa magazine, Al Jazeera, also the Saudi television, Ramadan 2006. The television had an interview by Dr. Zaki Mustafa, the head of astronomy of the King Abdulaziz City for Science and Technology, Riyadh, who was clearly saying that it was not possible to see the Hilal on the evening of September 22nd, but they did announce seeing that day. There are other media reports like the Saudi Al-Watan newspaper, which is a very good and daring article called Testimonies of the Impossible by Hamza Al-Muzani. And this brother, they investigated the witnesses of Zulhijjah 1425, and they found them to be more than 80 years old. They found them to be more than 80 years old. And this was a very daring article, and the author came under a lot of pressure, but alhamdulillah is fine. I have met him. Here's an article in the Arab News which I talked about, and this article is again very, very nice, and it shows, for example, that it shows, for example, here, let's enlarge this a bit so that you can read more clearly what it says. Okay. Says it's not valid, it's wrong to completely ignore the information through calculations, and he's citing scholars like Subuki before, and it's basically saying that the task of Islamic ruling of the sighting should be assigned to a number of committees with three people in each committee, working in different areas of the country and sending information on the results of the mission, to Darul Ifta. And if no committee is able to sight the moon, then in the area assigned to it, then no other testimony should be entertained. And if these committees are briefed about calculation of the birth of the new moon, they will be able to combine that knowledge with the results of their own missions, and we avoid mistakes. So here it is making things, giving recommendations as to how things should be done, which is very good. And also it says, for example, it says here that what happened last Ramadan was that it was absolutely confirmed on the basis of astronomy that the new moon was impossible to sight anywhere in the Middle East, Asia, Africa and Europe on the evening of January 6th. Yet that evening it was declared that witnesses have testified to sighting it, and Ramadan was ended that night. Here we have a case of assumed knowledge contradicting certain knowledge. The first should have been tested thoroughly and rejected, like a court may reject the testimony of a witness after cross-examination. The point is that it is perfectly possible not to see something when it is present, but it is impossible to see something when it is not there. If the moon is not born yet, how can it be sighted? And so on, so forth. So this was a very good article which referred, to the mistake in Saudi sighting. This is that article I was talking about in Al-Watan newspaper, which talks about testimonies of the impossible, Shahud al-Mustaqil, and those 80-year-old witness. This is the fatwa of Shaykh Yusuf al-Qardawi, which basically says that if you broke your fast following the Saudi announcement, then you can make up for the missed fast. His more from the Arab Union of Astronomy and Space Sciences, and again this strongly criticized the Saudi errors. Now, what about the scholars themselves of Saudi Arabia? Scholars like Sheikh Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymeen, who we met personally, they were aware of the errors. He mentioned about a person seeing the waning crescent at Fajr in the same day evening the Hilal was announced, which is not possible. There are scholars today, alhamdulillah, like Abdullah Salman al-Munayim of Makkah Mukarramah, who are supporting using calculations to reduce the errors. And historically, great Islamic scholars like As-Subki have also supported using astronomy to negate this erroneous sighting. Also, Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah, who is very widely respected in Saudi Arabia, has also written on how soon a Hilal can appear after the old moon seen at Fajr disappears. Ibn Taymiyyah also writes that if the angle of the Hilal at sunset is less than a certain degree, it is impossible to see it, and if it is more than another degree, then we can see it easily, if there is no clouds and so on, of course. However, in the middle of these two limits, there is a zone of uncertainty, basically, and this is a book of Fatawa by Ibn Taymiyyah, and it's a very detailed work, but somehow people are not even aware of all these works. In 1421 Eid al-Fitr, this was perhaps the first time in Saudi Arabia that several of these early witnesses were actually turned down. They were refused due to a solar eclipse. But of course, you will not have an eclipse every year. And when I asked a Shaykh in Makkah if we will still accept the witnesses from the same people the next year, and he said yes. And I was aghast. I said, well, you have discredited them, why will you accept? But then that's what he said, and looks like the problem is not going to go away. It's the problem's there. Now, let's talk about our situation. There are people who talk about local sighting, they talk about global sighting, and they talk about Saudi sighting. Now, Ikhtilaf al-Matale, or multiple horizons, or local sighting, And Ittihad al-Matale, Wahdat al-Matale, single horizon global sighting, these are two well-known fiqh positions. However, these days there is a third new position being promoted, that is just follow Saudi Arabia. This position is different from both local sighting, which would and it's different from global sighting or Ittihad al-Matale, because global sighting means accept the first sighting report, whether it's from Saudi or from Nigeria or Egypt or America, anywhere, without restricting that report to be from Saudi Arabia. So this new position of following only Saudi sighting for places outside Saudi Arabia, it really has no basis in Sharia, and it can be proved wrong by the following very simple argument. Let's say at Makkah sunset time the hilal was too small to be seen. Now after about 11 hours, let's say you are in California where the sun is now setting, in these 11 hours of course the hilal would grow in size, it will become bigger, and let's say it crosses the threshold and becomes visible. Now I'm sure no scholar can justify saying that these California people should now ignore their own sighting and wait for next day's announcement of Saudi sighting. So here's a very clear example of why following only Saudi sighting is baseless. It's wrong. Let me just repeat it. Let's say at Makkah sunset time the hilal was too small to be seen, but later on after about 11 hours when the sun is setting in California it becomes bigger and it is seen. I don't think anyone can using the Quran Sunnah justify that California should now ignore its own hilal and wait for Saudi next day. So this is a very simple proof that only following Saudi sighting for countries other than Saudi Arabia is an invalid position. Now, people say that this has never happened. People say, oh, they will see in Saudi before California. That's not true. We talked about that before. East and West are relative, and any place could see the hilal first, you know. And in fact, the chances of hilal sighting in Western Hemisphere before Saudi are quite high. And this can be calculated very simply as follows. The time difference between Saudi and California is about 11 hours, while the total time around the world is 24 hours. Thus, the chances of the curve for the first visibility of hilal sighting falls between Saudi and California is about 11 by 24, about 45%. Thus, almost 1 in 2 times California should sight the hilal one date before Saudi. The reason we never hear of this is itself a proof of the Saudi errors, that they are often wrong. Okay, now let's talk about Ittihad al-Matale. Ittihad al-Matale actually corresponds to the flat earth, and it is actually impossible to implement. If the earth was flat, then there would be one Matla, one horizon, and the hilal would be seen at the same time everywhere in the world. But then there will also not be any time zones, and the prayer times would also be the same everywhere. But due to the spherical shape of the earth, there are differences in time zones. Thus, when the sun sets in California, if the hilal is first seen there, it's already about Fajr time in Makkah, and the next day around Asr in Indonesia. How can Makkah or Indonesia start fasting by a California hilal sighting? They can't. So it is impossible to implement Ittihad al-Matale or global sighting. Also, it's difficult to authenticate faraway sightings, and this issue of Ittihad al-Matale or global sighting makes us prone to the frequent errors in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. And it also is based on the artificial international dateline, which has been changing also. Now let's talk about Ikhtilaf al-Matale. Ikhtilaf al-Matale is actually supported by astronomy. The earth is spherical and the horizons are multiple, which means Ikhtilaf al-Matale. And the local sighting of hilal is like local sighting of sun for the local prayers. So what we see is that astronomy tells us that the first hilal sighting, the lunar date line, or actually the lunar date curve, you know, this roughly parabola shaped curve, they can occur anywhere on this map. They could be here, they could move to the left, they could move to the right next month, and so on and so forth. So what happens is that astronomy supports that this lunar date curve, which shifts every month, it divides the world into 2 parts, one which see the hilal on different dates. So areas inside this roughly parabola shaped curve should see the hilal today, and those areas which are outside this curve should not see the hilal today. So if the earth was flat, then of course instead we would see the hilal everywhere all over the earth, but that is not the case. And if that was the case, then we will also be praying Fajr at the same time all over the world. Now just look at this curve a little more carefully. Actually it's not one curve, but you see 4 curves here. The first curve says it's easily visible by naked eye. The second curve says it's possible to be seen, but only if there's perfect conditions. The third curve says you can see easily with a telescope, and the fourth curve says you can see with the telescope only if it's very good conditions. Or actually the third curve says you need a telescope to actually find the moon first, and then maybe you'll see the moon with naked eye. But the fourth curve says that no, you can only see with the telescope and not by naked eye. And we'll talk more about these curves later on. But this curve, the message to right now is that these curves divide the earth into multiple sections, and not all of the earth can see on one date. So Ikhtilaf al-Matala is supported by astronomy. Ikhtilaf al-Matala is also supported by scholars. First of all, before we go to that, Ikhtilaf al-Matala also leads to better accuracy, since we don't get influenced by the incorrect decision in distant places, and it makes the dates roughly, predictable roughly about 80% of the time for the naked eye sighting criteria. So we should in fact aim for having Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha celebration around much of the populated world in about 24 hours. But this 24 hours will be 2 solar dates because of the spherical geometry and the artificial international solar date line. So roughly 24 hours, most of the earth except the areas near the poles should celebrate Eid al-Fitr or Eid al-Adha. Now, having 2 solar dates is not such a big thing. I mean, in fact, at any one moment of time, one part of the world has 1 solar date, like right now, and another eastern part of the world has the next solar date. So even one moment of time can have 2 solar dates. And Ikhtilaf al-Masala is supported by ulama like Shaykh al-Uthaymeen, Ibn Taymiyyah, Mufti Taqi Usmani, and many others, and it is practiced by Saudis themselves in Saudi Arabia. Also the classical jurists Shafi, Maliki, Hanbali, they all support Ikhtilaf al-Matali. Only the Hanafi, the early Hanafi jurists, they, at a time when it was thought that the earth was flat, they were supporting Ittihad al-Matali, but that was for short distances and not for the whole world. And today, countries like India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, where Hanafi fiqh is dominant, Ittihad al-Matali is not practiced. Now let's talk about the views of Islamic scholars. First of all, I talked about Shaykh al-Uthaymeen, whom we met personally, and they support Ikhtilaf al-Matala. He supports Ikhtilaf al-Matala, saying that Muslims outside Saudi should do their own sighting. And there's a reference to his fatwa in this book, Fatawa Islamiyah by Shaykh bin Baz, Shaykh Uthaymeen, Shaykh Jibreen, by Darul Watan and Nashr. Shaykh Uthaymeen also writes that Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah supports Ikhtilaf al-Matala, or local sighting. Saudi Arabia itself practices it. And he in fact supports Ikhtilaf al-Matala, Shaykh Uthaymeen supports Ikhtilaf al-Matala for Eid al-Adha also, meaning for all 12 months, including Eid al-Adha. And there's a reference to his fatwa, and many scholars have a consensus pretty much that for all 12 months you should follow the same system, meaning both Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. And there's a reference to these fatwas. This is the book I was talking about, as you can see, it's by Shaykh bin Baz, Shaykh Uthaymeen, Shaykh Jibreen, the top 3 scholars of Saudi Arabia. And in this chapter, Ahkam Dukhul al-Shuhur wa Khuruj wa Ru'yat al-Hilal, the rules regarding the entering of the month and the exit and the seeing of Hilal, it says very clearly, Ru'yat al-Hilal fil balad la talzam jamil bilad bi ihkamihi. Hilal sighting in a country does not obligate all other countries by its ruling. Here's a translation of this fatwa. Here's the fatwa of Shaykh Uthaymeen explicitly for Eid al-Adha. And we asked him that, yes, we know you support local sighting, but what about Zul Hijjah? And basically he says that for the matale are different, Ikhtilaf al-Matale for Ramadan as well as all other months, and the same rule applies for all months. Now he does acknowledge there's difference of opinion, but he himself supports Ikhtilaf al-Matale for all months, including Zul Hijjah, meaning Eid al-Adha. And there are other references on the websites with Shaykh al-Uthaymeen's fatwa saying, do your Eid al-Adha by following the local date. Here's a very good fatwa by Mufti Taqi Usmani, a well-known scholar of our times and a deputy chairman of the Islamic Fiqh Academy of the Organization of Islamic Countries. And basically he's saying that when Isna or some people claim that element of place is dominant in Eid al-Adha, and because of Arafah and so on, so Eid al-Adha should be the next day of Yawm al-Arafah. He says this is in total disagreement of the teachings of Quran and Sunnah and the Sharia position recognized throughout the centuries. He said this is an unprecedented view which has never been adopted by any of the Muslim jurists during the last 1400 years, and it has many defects. And he talks at length, and you can read this article at leisure. He says that the timings are different, and we cannot, for the sake of unity, for example, start praying Fajr by Saudi time, So he has given a lot of thought to this and given a very detailed answer, and I wish you could read through the details of it. So Eid al-Adha basically should be on the 10th of Zulhijjah by local date, and synchronizing Eid al-Adha worldwide with Saudi sighting is not appropriate because of the following reasons. Number one, as we had mentioned before, following Makkah sighting for worldwide dates, this is neither Ikhtilaf al-Matale nor Itab al-Matale, which means, follow the first sighting, and thus it has no dalil in Sharia. Secondly, we see that Hajj became obligatory much later, while Eid al-Adha was instituted in the second year of Hijrah. Thirdly, we do not see any evidence from the Seerah that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ made any attempts to synchronize the Eid al-Adha of Medina with the Hilal sighting in Makkah, even though the 10 nights and 9 days were enough to send a messenger between Makkah and Medina. Furthermore, the Hujjaj don't even pray Eid al-Adha. Also, Shaykh Ibrahim Mehman of Darul Uloom Buffalo, New York, has proven that in the last year of Prophet ﷺ's life on this earth, the calendars of Makkah and Medina were different. And other scholars have also mentioned that it was happening that the Eids in Makkah and Medina were on different dates. So we do not see this synchronization even between Makkah and Medina, neither from Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, nor from the Khulafa Rashideen, nor from Tabi'een, Tabi'een, and the Ummah in general. In fact, for more than 1,000 years, it could not even be done. And then we have clear fatwas of current scholars of Saudi Arabia, like Shaykh al-Uthaymin, and international scholars like Mufti Taqi Usmani, who are not supporting having Eid al-Adha with the, worldwide with the Hajj date. And also we see that in the dates in Saudi, in fact, are most often wrong. Even their own 6 official Hilal sighting committees, they are disagreeing with the official date, and the Arab Union of Astronomy and Space Sciences has been criticizing them. Shaykh Yusuf al-Qardawi has given a fatwa against the Saudi announced date, and their own newspapers and and magazines have been talking about the Saudi errors. They are acknowledged by the Saudi media, and like I said, it's possible that in many cases you can see the Hilal in America before Saudi Arabia. So if you say we'll have Eid al-Adha by the Hajj date, that means you'll have to ignore your own sighting in America and wait for the Saudi sighting next date. Clearly that is totally against the injunctions from the Quran and the Sunnah regarding starting the month. So some people say, no, we're doing it really for unity. But if you really want unity locally in our area, then it is permissible for those who believe in the wrong Saudi dates, which are usually a day earlier. It is permissible for them to delay and pray Eid on their second day, since Eid prayers are permissible on any of the 3 days. But those who follow the correct later date cannot pray a day early. It's invalid for them. So if you really want unity, then go with the later date, which is the correct date. Now let's talk about calculations. The first question is, what calculations are we talking about? Are we talking about the astronomical new moon, which is the totally dark invisible moon, which is not the Hilal? No, we should not talk about that. If we talk about calculations, we should first of all talk about the calculations for the naked eye visibility of Hilal from the surface of the earth. And the Matla for this visibility is the local Matla. In the case of North America, we've taken the US and the contiguous US and Canada as the Matla, because if you take any bigger than that, it becomes too much waiting for the East Coast. ISNA in 2006 adopted calculations, but these calculations were way off the mark. They were calculating even a small possibility of a telescopic sighting at the international dateline, which is about 7 hours from the East Coast. And these calculations were proven wrong by actual photographs of the thin crescent taken next day and posted on websites such as zatuna.org. And also they were proven wrong by actual sighting reports, because not only was the Hilal not seen at the IDL, but it was not seen across the IDL beyond the international dateline. In Japan, in Indonesia, could not see it. Thailand could not see it. And the first sighting happened next day in Sri Lanka. So how could next day's sighting of Sri Lanka be used for America or on the previous day? So ISNA calculations were proven wrong. Now in 2007 they have again changed the calculations, and this time they are talking about using moonset after sunset in Makkah. This is even more incorrect. So they are just using the calculations which are blatantly incorrect. Also, this ISNA calculation is having a bad effect overseas. In my last meeting with the Chief Justice Sheikh Saleh Al-Udhan, I met him in his masjid in Riyadh, and he was referring to the ISNA calculations to justify the dates which were the announced dates. So first of all, if you want calculations, use the right calculations which are for local visibility of Hilal, and they are available at www.icoproject.org, www.crescentwatch.org, and other websites. Secondly, there is a zone of uncertainty in calculations. What does it mean? So after we agree that calculations should be done to predict the naked eye sighting, the point is that these models, when they are built, they are primarily based on the angular separation of the moon and sun at sunset. They are not, the age of the moon is not the single most important factor, because in summer you can see a younger Hilal, and in winters it takes a much older Hilal to be seen. So the angular separation is the most important. Now, when you see these calculations, there are areas called zone of uncertainty where the calculation cannot give you an answer. Let's go back to a slide we saw before. Okay. See, we said here there's multiple curves here. So this curve says you will definitely see by naked eye in this area if there is, of course, no clouds. Now this second curve says that you can only see if there is very good conditions, very perfect conditions. So this area between these two curves may see the Hilal or it may not see the Hilal, and clearly the calculation is not going to give you a definitive yes or no answer. Now here other areas it could give an answer. Here it will give you a definite yes answer. Here it will say definitely you cannot see the Hilal at all. But this area is the zone of uncertainty, and you cannot say for sure that Hilal will be seen or not. So the issue is that we have to understand that these calculations do have a zone of uncertainty, and for about 20% of the cases, when the western part of our Matla is in the zone of uncertainty, then we have to use actual sighting to decide. And when the calculations are not in the zone of uncertainty for our area, then of course we can reject or negate the false sighting by use of calculations. So we should work on refining these calculations using worldwide data and establish Hilal sighting committees, and let these two go hand in hand. We are not saying calculations can replace sighting. They can only help sighting, and that's a view of many scholars of the dominant madhab and scholars like Imam Nawawi and Ibn Taymiyyah, that use the calculations to negate. So what we're saying is use the calculations to negate the errors, but not to replace sighting completely. And of course, if we are outside the zone of uncertainty, and if the matla is big enough, then we could use them in the positive also perhaps, but definitely we cannot say that we do not need sighting at all. So this is something I just want to also quote Dr. Muhammad Ilyas of Malaysia, the founder of modern day Hilal visibility models, that he basically says that there are numerous ill-informed astronomers assuming the role of experts who on occasions have made claims about astronomical calculability of their visibility far beyond the limit permitted by the then standards of understanding of underlying physical phenomena. The ability to land the man on the moon has been wrongly assumed to be a valid defense of the calculations. So basically what he's saying is that yes, the position of moon can be calculated precisely, but the visibility models can have a zone of uncertainty, and it is the non-astronomers who are sometimes more confident about this calculation than the astronomers themselves. So sometimes it is said a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and that's what we see happening here. So the bottom line is we are saying sighting and calculations are complementary and both are needed. Yes, indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put rules in place, and it says in Surah Ar-Rahman, the sun and the moon are following, bihusban, they are following a hisab. So we do have scholars like Al-Munay of Makkah Mukarramah who are supporting using calculations to negate sightings, but not to replace sighting. Also, the historical basis or one of the early scholars to use calculations to negate errors is Imam As-Subki. And basically what he says is that calculation is a yaqeen, or a certainty, and sighting is a zan, or something which can be doubt. So certainty should overrule the doubts. However, this means that you use the calculations only outside the zone of uncertainty. By the way, this fatwa is also referred to a recent Arab news article, not a very recent, it's 2002, so it's also referred by a Saudi newspaper. And also scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah have written a lot on astronomy, in fact, and given the minimum angle for the moon visibility. But none of them are saying that you completely replace sighting by calculations. So again, sighting and calculations are complementary. If the calculations say with certainty that Hilal cannot be visible, then we should reject or negate the false sighting and reduce the errors. But when we are in the zone of uncertainty, then we should be using actual sighting only, and we should keep on refining our models until they become as accurate as the Salah times. And like I said, we should use these calculations, but only outside the zone of uncertainty. Here is a very good fatwa by Shaykh Al-Uthaymin on solar eclipse and dates, and basically he's saying that it's not possible to have an eclipse later than the sunset and still have the next day as the first of the month. And it's a very good fatwa. Let me just point out to the last points he's saying. He says, therefore, if a person claims that the month began in the same night when an eclipse took place after sunset, is like a person who claims that the moon would be in a full moon position in the same night when it was born, or like the person who claims that the sun would rise before dawn, or like a baby will show up before he gets out of the womb of his mother. All these things are impossible according to the rules and behavior that Almighty Allah has ordained for the splendid universe in its precise system. As for the belief in the power of Almighty Allah, there is no doubt that Almighty Allah is capable to do anything, and He is also capable to combine the two moons and to separate them and to dim them or to make them shining in their light at any time. As He stated in the glorious Quran in Surah Al-Qiyamah, at length when the sight is dazed and the moon is buried in darkness and the sun and moon are joined together, that day man will say, where is the refuge? But the rules that Almighty Allah laid down concerning the sun and the moon of this world are fixed and do not change, except in the case of a miracle for a prophet of the honor of, or in the honor of a wali. So basically Shaykh Al-Uthaymin is saying is that don't expect these miracles to be happening every year in Saudi and you get all these wrong dates. Okay, naked eye sighting. Naked eye sighting or the unaided eye sighting is close to the Sunnah, and scholars like Al-Uthaymin, they are against use of telescope. He indicates that using telescopes is like putting a burden on Muslims which Allah does not want. Of course, eyeglasses or contacts are just a correction. They're not, they're meant to make you equivalent to naked eye. Other scholars like Maulana Imran Wauda and Mufti Ibrahim Desai of South Africa, they also indicate that the hadith of Sumu Layuratihi, it says the condition is sighting, meaning the physical sighting with the naked eye. Still other scholars, they cite Surah Al-Baqarah verse 189, which refers to the Hilal as a definite sign, and a sign is something visible to a common person. Now, my personal point in this also is that using telescopes can change the date. Using a telescope can result in seeing the Hilal one date earlier. And we saw that, and let's go back to the slide we saw before, this visibility curve. Now, we said that this area, here you have to use a telescope, otherwise you will not be able to see the Hilal. Likewise, this area, it's impossible to see the Hilal by naked eye in this area, but you may be able to see it by a telescope. So if you are in this area for a particular month, then using the telescope can change the date to one date early. So my point is that naked eye sighting is something which is simple and it gives the right dates, whereas telescopes can give an early date. Also, using a telescope will mean that effectively the majority of the Muslims will be excluded from this process and they will not be able to get confidence in this. Furthermore, using naked eye sighting should back calculate to the same dates that were likely decided by Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. For example, the Hajjat al-Wida being on a Friday, and likewise the Siyam Abiyat being the white fast being 13, 14, 15 of the month, meaning close to the full moon as opposed to 14, 15, 16 and so on and so forth. So excluding telescopes also reduces the zone of uncertainty, because now there is no the added uncertainty of having or not having a telescope is not there. So what we're saying is that the naked eye sighting is a simple method used by the majority of the Muslim Ummah, and successfully and correctly. So furthermore, using telescopes does not have any benefit. Why? Because it does not make it easier, it does not make it does not remove the uncertainty, because behind the telescope, remember, eventually is still the naked eye. So it does not improve the uncertainty. In fact, it increases the uncertainty, because now you may or may not have a telescope, and that's an added factor. So you should not use telescope for the official decision. However, telescopes can be used to and should be used to negate the errors. Meaning, if even a telescope could not see the Hilal, then how could somebody claim a wrong sighting? Okay, use group sighting. We are doing a lot of Hilal fighting these days, but unfortunately most of us have given up the sunnah of Hilal sighting, and that's what I think is the real solution. Those countries where Hilal sighting is common by the masses, where sunnah is alive, they have very few errors. So this is something we should do. There's a masnoon dua to be read after seeing the Hilal. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Alhamdulillah alladhi khalaqani wa khalaqaka wa qaddara laka manazil wa ja'ala laka ayatina lil alamin. Allah is the greatest, Allah is the greatest, Allah is the greatest. Praise be to Allah who created me and you and decreed for you the phases and made you a sign for the universe. So we encourage sighting and group sighting to reduce the errors, because individuals can have errors, and it's reported from our Aslaf that one Sahabi, Hazrat Anas in an old age, he claimed to see the Hilal when nobody else could see it, and it was found that there was a white hair in front of his eye. So we should establish these Hilal sighting committees, and in fact the Saudi country has a very good system of their official Lajnat Lil Hilal. They are very accurate committees. We wish that we should ask the people of influence in Saudi Arabia to support these committees, and support that people who want to sight the Hilal should go with these committees, and these committees should be the ones giving the results, inshallah. Another very important point is that how many witnesses are enough. Now, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik and Imam Ahmad, they have required a large number of witnesses for a town, not for a whole country or a continent, but just for a town, when the sky was clear. And Imam Ahmad, he has accepted one witness for Ramadan and two for Eid, but that's only when the sky was cloudy. And the basis for these opinions are basically, I think, from the hadith in which the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he accepted the shahada of Hilal sighting of a Bedouin coming from outside Medina. That hadith also mentions that it was cloudy in Medina that evening. And this is the hadith is quoted from Ibn Majah in Kitab al-Sawm. The Hilal of Shawwal was clouded or covered to us, so we fasted. And then came some writers at the end of the day and they testified to the Prophet ﷺ that they saw the Hilal and so on. But the point I'm saying is that it mentioned in the hadith that the Medina was cloudy. So for non-cloudy skies, scholars are asking for a large number of witnesses, except Imam Shafi. Now Imam Shafi, rahmatullah, he is still accepting one witness for Ramadan and two for Eid. But if you want to follow Imam Shafi, then you should follow his entire opinion. In his case, his Matla was only about 48 miles. The distance for Qasr. In other words, Imam Shafi would not accept the Hilal sighting of a town which is more than 48 miles away from his own town's limits. So if you want to follow Imam Shafi, then you should only follow the sighting of basically your own town and those towns which are within 48 miles from the limits. So otherwise, historically, scholars have asked for a large number of witnesses. Imam Abu Yusuf, who was the Qadi of Baghdad, he required more than 50 people. Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad required a group from each masjid, such a large number that it is difficult to discredit them. Imam Khalf bin Ayyub asked for a minimum of 500 people in Balkh. So this is not a new problem, and the scholars before us have solved this problem, and we can use the same solution. Also, it's mentioned that Hazrat Umar radhiyallahu anhu as Khalifa did not accept the claim of sighting by some if the moon was not visible to others, including him, at the same spot. So here's the solution. which has been there before and we should apply today. Now, there is a very good fatwa by Mufti Taqi Usmani at this albalagh.net, and again he is saying that evidence of only a few people should not be taken as a proof of existence of moon at the horizon, and Ramadan or Eid should not be started on that basis alone unless there is evidence of people in overwhelming numbers. So he's saying that if astronomy says it's not possible, then don't accept only one or two people's witnesses, but ask for a large number. And he's relying on the fatwa, which basically says that if the matla is clear, if the sky is clear, then don't rely on only one or two witnesses. So extending the requirement of Jam Ghafir, or the requirement of a large number of witnesses to accept and make a decision on the new month in the case of clear skies, he's extending that large number requirement, the Jam Ghafir requirement, to also the case where astronomical calculation says it's not possible to sight. This is a very important fatwa and very important ijtihad of today, and this has been adopted by North American scholars in the 2007 San Jose, California resolution, and this is the basis of the current process of the Hilal sighting committee of North America. So again, to summarize, if astronomy says impossible to be seen, then don't accept the witnesses of just one or two people, but insist on a very large number. That's, I think, is a very good solution, which brings in science and Sharia together in harmony, and a solution which I think everybody can agree on, inshallah. Now, one issue remains is what should be the size of matla. Now, in case of Imam Shafi, he has taken a very small matla, only about 48 miles from city limits. But most jurists today, they support a bigger matla. But clearly, the matla cannot be so wide in terms of longitudes or time zones that it becomes a problem for the people on the eastern part of the matla to wait late at night for news to arrive after sunset in the western part. Also, the vertical or the latitudinal distance should not be too much, since the seasonal variations have a large effect on hilal visibility. After all, one of the main bases for ikhtilaf al-matale or local sighting is Hadith Qurayb, where a person coming from Damashq to Medina and reporting the sighting of Damascus, his sighting was not accepted for Medina by Ibn Abbas radhiyallahu anhu, saying basically that this is how Prophet ﷺ asked us to do, meaning Medina people do Medina sighting. So note that the difference in the location of Damascus and Medina is more of latitude than of longitude. And clearly, if you cross the equator, then the seasons change completely. When it's winters in the northern hemisphere, the summers in the southern hemisphere, and hilal is more easily seen in summer than in the winter. So, for example, the matla should typically not cross the equator. So, North American matla should not include South America. Actually, my personal view is to use the hilal visibility curves to decide the matla. But this is a little more complicated. So for now, I think we can promote a reasonably small matla, inshallah. Let's summarize what we learned. Number one, the visible hilal with its characteristic crescent shape, a shape which is described as Urjun al-Qadim in Surah Yasin in Quran, is typically a day or more after the completely dark, invisible astronomical new moon or no moon. Number two, any place around the earth, usually closer to the equator, can be the point of first visibility of the hilal. Then as we go west of this place, hilal should be bigger and easier to be seen. And often the hilal could be seen in the west before Saudi. Number three, following Saudi announcement for worldwide date is neither ikhtilaf al-matale, local sighting, nor ittihad al-matale, global sighting, which means follows the first sighting without restricting to Saudi only. And hence it is not a valid Sharia position at all. And this is further obvious from the case where, let's say, California sees the hilal one date before the Saudi, the chances of which are about 45%, and clearly you can't ask California to ignore its own sighting and wait next day for Saudi sighting. Number four, Ittihad al-Matale or single horizon or global sighting would be valid if the earth were flat. But because of the spherical shape of the earth, it is impossible to follow, let's say, California sighting in Indonesia, which is already next day afternoon at the time of California sunset. Number 5, Ikhtilaf al-Matali or multiple horizons local sighting is supported by astronomy and by scholars worldwide, including Saudi Arabia, and is as natural as using local time for Salah, for the daily prayers. Number 6, much of the populated world except the areas close to the poles should have Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha etc. in about 24 hours, but these 24 hours will be 2 days or 2 dates because of 2 solar dates because of the artificial international solar date line. Number 7, Ikhtilaf al-Matali or local sighting also applies to Zulhijjah or Eid al-Adha per the fatwa of Shaykh al-Taymin of Saudi Arabia, by Mufti Taqi Usmani, by many scholars. And it is also very easy to prove that following Saudi's announcement for Zulhijjah is not correct by a simple case where California, in about 45% of the cases, sees the Hilal before, so they have to ignore their own sighting and wait an extra day, which I don't think anybody can justify. Also, we do not see any attempts of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ trying to synchronize Eid al-Adha of Makkah and Medina, even though the 9 days and 10 nights were sufficient to send a messenger. Furthermore, if somebody still believes in the wrong Saudi dates, they could pray their Eid al-Adha on their second day for the sake of unity, because they can pray on any of the 3 days, while those who believe in the correct later date cannot pray a day early. But I just want to point here that those of us who are going for Hajj still need to follow the Saudi date, even if it is wrong, because we are in their domain, and the error is the responsibility of the error is not on us, and may Allah forgive and accept, inshallah. Let's continue. Number 9, UmmUlQura calendar is a very simplistic calendar. It's ahead of Hilal visibility. It's meant for civil use, but does set the expectations of the people and hence promotes errors in the religious dates as well. So King Abdulaziz Seri for Science and Technology should be asked to update it to reflect the current best models such as ICOP and the single biggest factor in Hilal visibility is not the age of the moon nor the sunset-moonset lag. In fact, the single biggest factor is the angular separation between the sun and the moon at local sunset. It must be at least a Danjon limit. So at the very minimum, UmmUlQura calendar should be updated to reflect the Danjon limit. Majlis al-Qada al-Ala of Saudi Arabia, it sort of ignores the decision of the 6 official Hilal sighting committees and accept the impossible claims. So we should encourage that they should ask these early sighters to go with the committees, and only when these committees confirm their witnesses, then it should be accepted. The errors in Saudi Arabia are often happening, and they are acknowledged in the Saudi press such as Al-Watan newspaper, Arab News, Al-Dawa magazine, Al Jazeera, Saudi television, and they are criticized by scholars like Al-Taymin, Al-Mane, Al-Qardawi, and so on. Number 12, calculations, when we do calculation, they should be for the Hilal. They should not be calculations for the astronomical new moon. And these calculations also have a zone of uncertainty. And if the western part of our Matla is in this zone, then calculations cannot give an answer. So we should use calculations to negate errors, but not to replace sighting completely. Number 14, we should promote refinement of these calculation models by joining and promoting sighting through ICOproject.org. Number 15, we should use naked eye sighting only, since using telescopes can change the date while not reducing the uncertainty, since eventually behind the telescope is still the naked eye, which brings back the uncertainty. But the telescope should be used to negate errors in the naked eye sighting. Number 16, we should encourage Hilal sighting and establish groups of Hilal sighting to reduce errors. In North America, we encourage all the masajid and individuals to join the HilalSighting.org, Hilal Sighting Committee of North America, which does require a large number of witnesses or Jam-e Ghafir in the case of astronomical impossibility. So it's using the fatwa of scholars like Taqi Usmani, which says that you require a large number of witnesses, not only in the case of clear skies, but also in the case when astronomers say it's not possible for Hilal to be sighted. The Matla size should not be too wide or too long, and I think the visibility curves can also be used to define the Matla. Now, what should we do? First of all, now that we know that just following the Saudi date has no basis in Sharia, since it's neither Ikhtilaf al-Matali nor al-Matali, we should no longer accept this policy. Further, we should use local sighting as supported by astronomy and recommended by Saudi scholars like Al-Taymin for all the 12 months, including Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. So for US, for example, for North America, for example, we have taken the contiguous US and Canada as a Matla, and if it's impossible to be seen or below the danger limit, then we should either refuse the witness or ask for a large number of witnesses. For Saudi itself, we should write letters and communicate with the king, with the government, with the ulama, with the ambassadors, with Matla al-Qadar Allah, with all due respect to all of them. We should encourage them that the 6 official committees of Saudi Arabia, which are really the very accurate system they already have, they should be empowered more. They should be the ones who can decide correctly about the dates, inshallah. Also, as a guide to reduce the errors, we should use the astronomical calculations, but the calculations we should use are those for the naked eye visibility of Hilal. And for that, the angle of separation is very important, and we should encourage UmmUlQura calendar also to adopt these calculations for visibility, and at least adopt the Danjon limit, before which it is not possible to see the Hilal. We should encourage Muslims worldwide to see the Hilal and report it to ICOP project and other places. We should publish pictures of the very thin Hilal to disprove the false reports of the previous evenings. We should continue efforts to educate with wisdom, but those going for Hajj should still follow the Saudi dates, and the error is inshallah not on them. The responsibility is on the people who are deciding, and may Allah forgive and guide us all. For those countries which are not able to organize Hilal sighting, or until they are able to organize it, for example, frequently an example is given of United Kingdom. They can, in that case, perhaps follow another country which is on the same longitude or close to the same time zone. A country like Morocco, which has been known to be very accurate in its decisions for the Islamic dates. So instead of following Saudi, if they want to follow somebody, then they should go down the same time zone or similar time zone and follow Morocco, for example. Now, here I would really like all of you, readers and listeners, inshallah, to publish this material, to distribute this link, to take these papers of mine which are available at these websites, translate them, publish them. You can have a PowerPoint presentation, this recording. You can project it in your masjid or group and show it over there, inshallah. If you want a more clear version of it, you can send me email, and I can tell you how to download a very clear version of it, as opposed to a Google video or a YouTube version, which may not be as clear. So the point is, this is an amana which has reached you, and you have to now propagate it further on the side of truth, so that we are able to solve this and all problems, inshallah. Finally, for those in North America, I highly encourage individuals and masajid to join the Hilal Sighting Committee of North America, www.hilalsighting.org, and those who are active on the international front, they should join the Islamic Crescent Observation Project, www.icoproject.org. That's all I had to say. If I said something good, it's from Allah. If I made any mistakes, may Allah forgive, and may Allah help us in this issue and all issues, help us in all the best in every sphere of our life, and give us the best in this life and the hereafter for all ummah. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Subhanallahi bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun, wa salamun alal mursalin, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa jazakumullahu khair. Wassalam.